Okay, now I was asked to speak on another topic which not even related to the first topic, so I have to kind of, sort of get my brain thinking in another direction here. So I was asked to talk about specifically who is Jesus or why Jesus. What is the exact title? Doesn't matter. Something along those. All right, Jesus the only way. Yes. Okay, great. Why? Okay, good. So there's many ideas, thoughts about who Jesus is. I'll list a few of them. It's not a complete list, but it's a pretty good list. Some people would say that Jesus is a sage, which is not a spice that you put on your food. A very wise person. For example, I'd say Buddha or Confucius would be a sage, a person that all would acknowledge was very, very wise. A prophet. Now, the Jewish definition of prophet might be different from the dictionary definition, but let's establish a prophet as being someone who could speak for God, who could speak the words of God. A liar. Some people would say that's what Jesus is. Crazy. Those are certainly some charges labeled against Jesus during his lifetime, that's for sure. Messiah, which means Savior. Son of Man, that has Jewish implications. God in the flesh. Wow, that's quite a charge. That's quite a claim. Imagine if your friend said to you, I'm God in the flesh. And you say, I'm Julius Caesar, Legend! Our group, Apologetics Research Society, sponsored a debate where the opponent, if you will, claimed that Jesus is a myth, not even a real person. A man. In other words, just a man. He's a man. He's just a man. I'm old enough to remember that one. Or an important religious leader amongst many similar important religious leaders. That's a very, very common view. And by the way, I want to show some evidence for. By the way, I believe more than one of these are true. Just so you know, they're not exclusive. You could be a prophet and a sage. You couldn't be a prophet and a liar, though. I don't think so. Some of these contradict. Just a man and God in the flesh, that clearly contradicts. And if anything I say tonight even creates the impression I'm trying to put down another religion or defame or say anything bad about any other religion, that's not my intent. If I come across that way, then just help me out later. That's not my intent. But I do want to show reasons why I believe that probably the correct choices would include prophet, Messiah, God in the flesh. And some of these others are probably ruled out by the data as I understand them. Mark 3:22 through 30, after Jesus said a few things, the family said, this guy's crazy. Now, evidence is they changed their mind. In fact, we know from Josephus that Jesus' brother James was the head of the church in Jerusalem after he died and after Peter left. The rabbi said he's possessed by a demon. That's recorded in the Bible, but we have the Babylonian Talmud, which says something similar. All right? Crazy, in other words. That's kind of, old world lingo for crazy. Jesus responded to both of these by saying, that doesn't make sense. And I agree, it doesn't make sense. It doesn't make sense. What do liars do? How do liars behave? From what we know about Jesus, does it make sense to conclude the guy was a liar? Does it make sense? What do crazy people do? This is a rhetorical question. I'm not asking you to raise your hand and answer the question. Just think about it. What do crazy people do? Well, maybe crazy people go and tell the Pharisees that they're a brood of vipers and whitewashed tombs. I don't know. Who is Jesus? Is he simply a sage? Is he right up there with Confucius? I don't know, Joseph Smith, that's a whole other story. I've got a book on Mormonism over there you can read if you want. Confucius, I think it was a sage. I haven't read everything he wrote, the Analects and all that, but he'd make my list of wise teachers. Buddha certainly would. I like Buddha, everything I know about him. Baha'u'llah, founder of a Baha'i, Lao Tzu. Well, I don't know if you can read that comic about Muhammad, but all right. So, is it just another means to reach some sort of enlightened state? What's a reasonable conclusion? We're going to ask a couple of questions at the end of this talk. What's a reasonable conclusion based on what we're going to look at? And that would be a reasonable response to Jesus. So I'm going to look at a couple of things. First of all, I'm going to look at prophecies. This is a fairly simple talk, fairly simple information. Doesn't take any scientific background. There may have been a couple of things I said in the first talk that might even have been outside of your range. I think everybody in here, nothing tonight in this part will be outside of anybody's range. Pretty simple stuff. Not hard to get. Jesus said things like in John 8:46, "Can anyone prove me guilty of sin?" And he said it around the people he'd lived around his whole life. I don't know, if I was hanging out with my friends, if I said, "Can anybody prove me guilty of sin?" they'd all raise their hands. You know what they said when Jesus said, "Can anybody prove me guilty of sin?" They said, "He's crazy." You know what they didn't say is, "Yeah, I can. And here's the list." Jesus said, "Before Abraham was born, I am." Not before Abraham was born, roughly 2000 BC. Not before Abraham was born, I was. He said, before Abraham was born, I am. And I am is the name of the Jewish God, which means I'm the self-existent one. Jesus said, "I and the Father are one." Would Buddha have said, "I and the Father are one"? Would Muhammad have said, before Abraham was born, I am? Would Lao Tzu have said to his disciples, "Can any of you prove me guilty of sin?" These are good questions. Jesus said in Luke 24:44, "This is what I told you while I was still with you. Everything must be fulfilled that is written about me in the law of Moses, the prophets, and the Psalms." Those are the three divisions of the Jewish Bible. So what he's saying here is, that book you've been reading for, 1,500 years or so, it was written about me. You can see why I got in trouble. And John 5:39 and 40 said, "You diligently studied the Scriptures." He's speaking to the Jewish scribes, Pharisees, the teachers of the law. And he says, "You diligently studied the Scriptures because you think that by them you possess eternal life. These are the Scriptures that testify about me." A bold statement. He's saying, your religion and all your Scriptures, the entire thing was written about me. Now, that's either a crazy man or some kind of deluded person, or, I don't know, maybe it's true. This is not a mere sage speaking. This is not merely a prophet. What did Muhammad claim? He claimed to be a prophet. What did Moses claim? He claimed to be a prophet. What did Buddha claim? Not much, actually. He's a humble guy. He claimed to have found the wise path to enlightenment. Okay. Now, what I want to do then is I want to talk about messianic prophecies. I did mention in the first talk, the evidence from the Bible and science for the inspiration of the Bible is relatively a small amount of information. And by the way, I want to say this. You can't prove the existence of God. You can't prove it. You can't prove it one way or another. It's not like, 2 plus 2 is 4. In all these things we ask, what's the most reasonable interpretation of the information? We looked at some information. I believe the most reasonable interpretation is that God exists. And here's the next question. What's the most reasonable interpretation given what Jesus claimed about himself and what we know about him in the Old Testament? And again, I'm not going to say I can prove, X plus Y plus Z equals 7 or whatever, and not to the level of mathematical proof, but I believe the reasonable conclusion is that he is who he said he was. All right, so we're going to be looking at messianic prophecies, and as we do, I want to look at it from at least a somewhat skeptical perspective. First of all, how do I know these prophecies were written hundreds of years beforehand? Because perhaps some of these prophecies we're going to read, they were kind of, sort of tweaked with afterward. Possibility? Well, actually, not a possibility. The reason is, we have the Dead Sea Scrolls in the Septuagint translation. The Septuagint translation from Hebrew to Greek made somewhere between 250 and 200 BC. We have manuscripts from the first century. And the Dead Sea Scrolls of the Hebrew Bible, there's cave number 4, the largest number. This is the Isaiah scroll from 150 BC. We have manuscripts from every single Old Testament book except Esther, from before Christ. Now, do you think that the Christians could have somehow convinced the Jews to change their scriptures to make it look like Jesus fulfilled the Messianic prophecies after this? I don't think that's a reasonable thing. All right, so I can say it is an absolute, unchallengeable fact that every single one of these prophecies existed at least 200 years before Christ. I believe at least 400. But let's just say at least 200 to be conservative. Fact. Okay, now, how do I know these things really happened? That's a good question. Using the Bible to prove the Bible can, to some extent, be circular reasoning. Let's be honest about that. For some of the information, we only have the Bible as the source of that information. And if we've established beyond a reasonable doubt that the Bible is reliable, then we can use that to some... But we have to be careful with circular reasoning. Now, what I've purposely chosen is events in the life of Jesus that we know are true from sources outside of the Bible. We know where he was born. We know where he lived. We know where he died. We know how he died. And we know some of the things he said, but not many, from outside non-Christian sources. So we have Josephus, we have Tacitus, we have the Jewish Talmud. I won't be looking at all these because it would take a bit too much time. We have established, I think beyond a reasonable doubt, that he was in fact a Jewish person whose mother was named Mary, whose father was named Joseph, was born in Bethlehem, who lived in Nazareth, who died in Jerusalem by crucifixion under Pontius Pilate. A few other basic facts. And these are the ones I'm going to be referring to in most of the prophecies we'll look at. Okay, here's some people claim that there was no such person as Pontius Pilate until they found this inscription that says Tiberius, Pontius Pilate, procurator of Judea, etc. I won't go into that. All right, number 3. Wait a minute. Maybe these aren't even prophecies of the Messiah. Maybe you read Nostradamus. You know, people use Nostradamus. You know, he predicted the 9/11 and he predicted JFK. If you read Nostradamus, you know, some of those things are kind of vague. I mean, in fact, not just kind of vague. They're really vague. So, I don't know. Again, taking the skeptical perspective, which I think all of us should take. Hello? All of us should take. If you can't be skeptical about what you believe, then maybe you don't actually believe it. Or at least, well, I should be a little concerned about that. So, how do we know they're prophecies of the Messiah? Now, what I'm doing is, all but one of the prophecies that I'm going to mention tonight are prophecies that Jews did agree before, and still agree after, are prophecies of the Messiah. The one exception I'll warn you about. All right, so in other words, if the Jews who don't believe in Jesus being the Messiah still say these are messianic prophecies, then I say, probably they're messianic prophecies. So Jesus wasn't taking them out of context, and even told the people he's speaking to in his lifetime, I am fulfilling all these prophecies that they knew of. Okay, great. Last skeptical question is this. Maybe Jesus, wanting to claim to be the Messiah, the great one of the Jews, maybe what he did is he read the Old Testament. The Old Testament says the Messiah has to do 10 jumping jacks, so he did 10 jumping jacks. Okay? That's a good question. Could he have faked these things in order to be able to make these claims? Now, there's a problem with that right away, because these prophecies included dying in a very horrible way. All right, so right away, question number 4 seems to have been answered, but I'll raise that as we go through these prophecies. Okay? So there we go. I'll start in Isaiah 53. You can read the whole thing. I'm just taking some excerpts here. If you read the whole thing, you'll see I'm definitely not taking it out of context. All right, he was despised and rejected by men, a man of sorrows, familiar with suffering. Now, is it a historical fact that Jesus was despised and rejected by men, a man of sorrows, familiar with suffering? Absolutely a fact. All right? So, could it be that Jesus, wanting to claim to be the Messiah, said, all right, now if I want to I'm going to be the Messiah. It's going to be awesome. I'm going to have all these followers. It's going to be great. But I got to suffer and get rejected. Yeah. In fact, if you want to suffer and get rejected, go around telling people before everyone was born, I am. And call the leaders of the people whitewashed tombs. So I will concede to the skeptic that although it's a fact that Jesus fulfilled this prophecy, could have been because he was trying to manipulate the people. He was pierced for our transgressions, crushed for our iniquities. The punishment that brought us peace was on him, and by his wounds we are healed. Was Jesus pierced? Absolutely, he was pierced. Now, he was crucified, and what happened was, you can read the 4 different accounts. They agree on this, that there were 3 crucified. Most of you know this already, but some of you don't. And Jesus, who was mortally wounded through this horrible torture that went before that, he only survived for roughly 6 hours on the cross. And it was the eve of the Passover. The Jews did not want to have these people being tortured during the Passover. Ended a pleas, they did. They broke the legs of the 2 criminals that were on either side, because when you're hung from a cross, if you can't support yourself on your feet, you die within a few minutes. They came to Jesus. He was already dead. You can read John, who testified to all these things. He was there. He was an eyewitness. And he was already dead. They didn't break his bones. We'll see that in Psalm 22. And they pierced his side. And blood separated from water came out, which happens about an hour after you die. The serum separates from the blood cells. Okay? Now, could Jesus have arranged to be pierced? Hey guys, do me a favor. I can't explain it right now. Well, my friends will help you out later on. Just trust me. I need to get pierced. So after I die, could you please pierce me? He was oppressed and afflicted. Yet he don't. Now, somebody say, well, yeah, John just said that because he read Isaiah 53, so he made up the piercing. Now, one thing I know about, I don't know if you ever known a pathological liar. Pathological liars are very, very careful about the amount of information they release. They say, oh, yeah, but the Bible was written for years and years afterward. Yeah, like 25 years. All right, 25 years ago, I lived in San Diego. Do you think I've forgotten where I lived 25 years ago? Do you think the hundreds of eyewitnesses couldn't remember if that had really happened? 25 years. Yeah, these people try to create the impression, oh, you can't trust anything. It was so long afterwards. Come on. Most of the people who were there that day were still alive. I say 25 years from now, most of you will still be alive. I bet 3/4 of you will still be alive. Do you think you'll be able to remember 25 years ago that I came here tonight? I think so. Okay? Anyway, he was oppressed and afflicted, yet he did not open his mouth. He's led like a lamb to the slaughter, as a sheep before his shearer is silent, so he did not open his mouth. Yeah, Jesus could have arranged that. Of course, the result was his death. Let's look at another prophecy. Micah 5:2. But you, Bethlehem Ephrathah, though you are small among the clans of Judah, out of you will come for me one who will be ruler over Israel, whose origins are from old, from ancient times. If there ever was a prophecy that the Jews would say is a messianic prophecy, it's this one. Where was Jesus born? In Bethlehem. Historical fact. Which Bethlehem? There's 2 Bethlehems. Bethlehem Ephrathah, the smaller one, of course. Isaiah 9:1. In the past, he humbled the land of Zebulun and the land of Naphtali. Now, probably a lot of you don't know where those places are. I'll show you on a map. But in the future, he'll honor God of the Gentiles by way of the sea along the Jordan. To us a child is born. He will be called Wonderful Counselor, Mighty God, Everlasting Father, Prince of Peace. Messianic prophecy to the max. This one will be born from the land of Zebulun and the land of Naphtali, from the Gentiles. Now let me show you where Zebulun is. Let me show you where Naphtali is. All right? Here's Zebulun. Here's Naphtali. Now see the border between Zebulun and Naphtali? Next slide. Here's where Nazareth is. Right on the border between Zebulun and Naphtali. Now anybody wanting to claim to be the Messiah has to be born in Bethlehem, but come from the region of Zebulun and Naphtali. Anybody in the room meet those qualifications? How many who have ever lived meet those qualifications? Historical fact, definitely. In fact, he was called the Nazarene. The Christian sect was called the Nazarenes. Okay? Could Jesus have arranged to be born in Nazareth? To be raised in Nazareth. Sure, if he's God. Could he have arranged to be born in Bethlehem? Absolutely, if he's God. Again, a reasonable conclusion is that Jesus is who he says he is. Okay? Psalm 22. By the way, of the scriptures we're looking at tonight, this is the only one that the Jews may or may not have seen as messianic. You can read it for yourself. I think probably they would have until after Jesus came, then maybe they would have changed their mind. An interesting historical note, a number of these messianic prophecies were in the weekly readings in the synagogues, and many of them were removed from those weekly readings after the time of Christ, for reasons that are fairly obvious. Anyway, Psalm 22, dogs have surrounded me, a band of evil men has encircled me, they have pierced my hands and my feet. Let's stop right there. How did Jesus die? Crucifixion, hands and feet. Historical fact. Tacitus, Josephus, and the Talmud agree. Did you know, because this was written 1000 BC by David. Do you know that crucifixion wasn't even invented until 300 BC? 700 years after David died. I try to imagine David writing this psalm. They've pierced my hands and my feet. Why did I write that? What's that about? All right. I wrote it. All right. Actually, the Persians invented crucifixion, but they crucified by tying of hands and feet. The Romans invented persecution by piercing hands and feet. 150 BC. 850 years after David wrote. I don't know. That's convincing to me. I can count all my bones. That goes back to the legs not being broken. Now, you can read in John 19 what happened. But again, I'll admit, most of the facts that I've already talked about are a matter of historical fact. Now, this one here, I admit, the only witness we have for this particular fact is John. But according to John, what happened was they stripped off his clothes, and after they nailed him to the cross, they were dividing up his garments. One for you, one for you, one for you, one for me. And then when they got to the inner garment, which was very, very valuable because it was sewn in one piece, rather than rip it, they gambled. I like to imagine those Roman soldiers, maybe one of them read, I don't know if they ever read Psalm 22 later on, thinking, well, that's kind of weird. Because, we divided the garments, and then we cast lots for the clothing. Okay. How about Zechariah? This is a fun one. And Zechariah 11, 12, and 13 is clearly a messianic prophecy. Clearly messianic. I told them, if you think it best, give me my pay, but if not, keep it. So they paid me 30 pieces of silver. Now, how much was Judas paid to betray Jesus? 30 pieces. So how do we know that? Well, because they wrote it down, and knowing that anybody could have read it, including the dozens of people who are in that room. He didn't make it up. Now, I like to imagine the Pharisees and the Sadducees later on going, 30 people. Oh, man. They're reading Zechariah. Oh, man. Why couldn't it have been 40? Not 29, not 31. What the prophecy said is God. It says the price at which they priced me. The Messiah here is God. 30 pieces. The Lord said to me, throw it to the potter, the handsome price at which they priced me. So I took the 30 pieces of silver, threw them into the house of the Lord to the potter. And again, according to the scriptures, which you can take as being reliable or not, it's up to you, but according to the New Testament writers, they said, what happened was Judas came in, he said, take the money, I don't want it. He didn't want Jesus killed, he wanted to manipulate him into rebelling against the Romans probably. So, and they said, we can't keep this money, so they used it and they bought a potter's field. I don't know about you, but that's pretty accurate there. Zechariah 5:20 BC. Now here's one of my favorites, Daniel 9:24 through 26. 77s are decreed for you and your people, in your holy city, to finish transgression, put an end to sin, to atone for wickedness, to bring in everlasting righteousness, to seal up vision and prophecy, and to anoint the most holy. No one understand this? From the issue of the decree to restore and build Jerusalem until the anointed one, the ruler, comes, there will be 7 sevens and 62 sevens. Now, if there was ever an obvious messianic prophecy, it's this one, because Messiah, anoint, the Messiah, the Messiah comes, the ruler comes to Jerusalem. 77s. My calculator, that works out to be 490. From the issuing of the decree to restore and rebuild Jerusalem. Now, Daniel wrote this roughly 540 BC. The issue to restore and rebuild Jerusalem wasn't written until long after he died. When was it written? Well, Ezra chapter 1 records the same thing as in the Cyrus cylinder that we saw today, that Cyrus said the people can go back and rebuild their temples. And they did. That was 538 BC, but he did not give them permission to rebuild their walled cities. Actually, it was a guy named Artaxerxes. You can read that in Ezra chapter 7. In 458 BC, the 17th year of Artaxerxes, to be specific. All right? It says to go back and rebuild Jerusalem. If you read the book of Nehemiah, you can see that's what actually happened. All right, let's do a little math. All right, 458 minus 490. That is negative 32, which is 32 AD. No, 33 AD. Because there was no year 0. All right? This is not hard to interpret. We know the decree. We can read it. We can read it in Ezra chapter 7. Now, a little bit more careful. If you read the prophet, it says, after 7 sevens and 62 sevens. So actually, the prophecy is during the last week. So if you read the prophecy carefully, what it actually says is somewhere between 26 and 33 AD. That's really what it says. The most likely year for Jesus to have been crucified probably was 30 AD, not the traditional 33 AD. Okay, the implications are pretty straightforward. Now, if somebody wants to claim to be the Messiah, they have to be born in Bethlehem, raised in Galilee, kind of somewhere near Nazareth. They have to be despised and rejected by men. Well, few of us are qualified for that. All right? They have to be meek and humble before their accusers. They have to get pierced. They have to be pierced in hands, feet, and pierced elsewise. Crucified. They have to have their garments divided and gambled over. They have to be betrayed for 30 pieces of silver. They have to come to Jerusalem to make atonement for sins, somewhere roughly 30 AD. And ride into Jerusalem on a donkey, and be born of a virgin, and blah, 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 blah. I don't know, how many people do you think would be qualified? Jesus said, before Abraham was born, I am. Jesus said, I fulfilled all the prophecies in the law of Moses, the prophets, and the Psalms. Seems a pretty good case here. Accident? Or is it evidence that Jesus is who he said he is? And he also did miracles. Did Buddha do miracles? Nothing wrong with Buddha. I've already said, I haven't read that much of the Buddhist scripture. I've read a fair amount, and, I like the guy. I'm serious. I'm not just saying that to be nice. I have nothing against many of these religious leaders, but Buddha did not work miracles, and that doesn't take any, I haven't worked any miracles. Are you cutting me as like some kind of dead weight person because I haven't worked any miracles? All right? It's not like makes you anything less because you didn't work miracles. But Jesus certainly did. Peter got before the people in Jerusalem. He said, Jesus of Nazareth was a man accredited to you by God by miracles, wonders, and signs, which God did among you, as you yourselves know. And nobody's saying, really? I hadn't heard about that. He worked miracles? Where was I? And the Jews did not deny this fact. The Babylonian Talmud says he was a sorcerer. All right, fine. In other words, he did miracles, they just had a different explanation. All right? Jesus said in John 10:30 through 33, if you don't believe what I have to say, just believe the miracles. I just want to look at a couple of the miracles. All right? We could just spend, I've got a whole book on the topic. You could read it if you want. John 6:40, Jesus says, I'm the bread of life. Now what's that? Like munch, 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 made out of wheat or barley? What's he talking about? It's a metaphorical statement. But Jesus said, if you feed on me, you will never die. You will have eternal life. What had he done just a few hours before? He fed 5,000 men plus women and children. Jesus had a way of saying, here's what I am and here's what I do. And it's not like this was in secret. It's not like Jesus has a little circle of believers. It's not like Joseph Smith has said, hey, we're going to get together. You guys are going to see this miracle, just you. We're going to pray for a few hours and blah, blah, blah. And then put a blindfold on you before thousands. Who were there? Pharisees, teachers of the law, his enemies, people who wanted to kill him. That's who he did the miracles in front of. Probably 12,000 people. He said, I'm the bread of life. And then in Hebrews, John 11:25, you may not know the story. Lazarus had died. And Lazarus was a good friend of Jesus, as were Martha and Mary. Martha and Mary sent a messenger, hey, send Jesus, your friend Lazarus is dying. Come right away. They knew he could heal him. Jesus didn't come till the fourth day. And he got there. And Martha said, if you'd only been here, Jesus, I know you could have saved him. And Jesus says, I am the resurrection and the life. He says, I know that people are going to read on the last day. He said, I am the resurrection and life. And then what's he do? They go out to the tomb. They go to the tomb and he says, open the tomb. They said, Jesus, it's smelling real bad in there. Now, science says this is impossible. That's the whole point. Some people say science proves you can't work miracles. That's a nonsense statement. That literally doesn't make sense. All science could say is, if that happened, that would be a miracle. If it smelled real bad in there, and the guy got up and walked out, that would be a miracle. And Jesus says, Lazarus, come out. And he walked out of the tomb. I'm going to look at that passage. I just want to read that one verse. It's kind of interesting what happens at the end of that story. Because I want to finish with this. John 11. We'll do some questions and answers. John 11. Verse 45. Therefore, many of the Jews who had come to visit Mary and had seen what Jesus did put their faith in him. My response to that is, yeah, no kidding. You would think so. Yeah, Lazarus, come out. He walked out of the tomb. 4 days after he'd been dead. And with him comes this horrendous smell. But look what else he says. But some of them went to the Pharisees and told them what Jesus had done. Then the chief priests and the Pharisees called a meeting of the Sanhedrin. What are we accomplishing, they asked. Here is this man performing many miraculous signs. If we let him go on like this, everyone will believe in him. Again, no kidding. And then the Romans will come and take away both our place and our nation. Then one of them named Caiaphas, who was a high priest that year, spoke up. You know nothing at all. You do not realize that it's better for you that one man die for the people than that all the nation would perish. Very ironic. So they decided to kill him. That day, there were two groups. The ones who said, he's the Lord. And the ones who said, we need to kill this guy. Okay? There was nobody who said, what a wise teacher. There's nobody who said, wow, what a great sage. Because I believe the choices are Jesus is Son of God, Messiah, God in the flesh, or is a liar, or a crazy person. I believe the myth idea is ruled out completely. And so, then what's a reasonable response to Jesus? What's a reasonable response? Again, I'm not asking you what's been proved tonight. What's been proved tonight is that I can talk for an hour and a half. Okay? But I think what we've shown beyond a reasonable doubt is that there is a Creator, a very smart and powerful one, and that Creator sent Jesus into the world, proved through the prophecies and the miracles that He worked. I'm going to end it there, and we'll take some questions. Actually, we'll take questions from here, yes? Great.